The sky had turned the color of burnt copper when the telegram arrived. Cole was out in the south pasture with Jacob, teaching the boy how to patch a saddle. Clara stood by the porch when she saw the rider, a courier from Abilene, dust-streaked and grim. He handed her the folded paper, tipped his hat, and rode off without a word. Clara stared at the telegram in her hand. The envelope was thin, but her fingers trembled just holding it. Something inside her knew it wasn't from the bank. Not the land office either. No, this was something colder, more personal. She opened it with careful fingers. Her eyes scanned the words. Her heart dropped. Marshal's office, Abilene. Cole Maddox wanted in connection with ... prior engagement. Assumed deceased. Confirm status immediately. The ink didn't blur, but the world around her did. She stood still for a long time before calling out. Cole! From the far end of the field, he looked up. Jacob stopped beside him, squinting toward the porch. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just held the paper in one hand like a preacher holding judgment. By the time Cole reached her, dust on his boots and shirt clinging to his back, she didn't speak. Just handed him the telegram. He read it in silence, folded it once, twice, then tucked it into the back pocket of his jeans like it was nothing more than a receipt. Is it true? She asked. He looked down, then up, met her eyes like a man too tired to lie. Most of it. I trusted you, she whispered. I never asked you to. But you let my children look at you like a hero. His jaw tightened. I didn't want them to, but I didn't stop it either. She folded her arms. Tell me everything, he nodded. Inside. They went into the house. She sat at the head of the table. He stood by the hearth, back to the fire, arms crossed over his chest, like he was about to confess in a church pew. I used to ride for a gang, he began. Rode under a man named Silas Greeley. He robbed banks across New Mexico and Kansas. I was good with a gun, good at getting out fast. Wasn't proud of it, but I was young, reckless. Clara said nothing. Couple years back, a job went bad. In Wichita, law caught up. Silas shot 2 deputies and ran. I stayed behind, helped a wounded officer instead. Took a bullet in the leg for it. He paused, voice low. They said I died in the crossfire. I let him believe it. So you disappeared? She said flatly. I had nothing left. No family, no name worth keeping. And then you showed up in my barn, he nodded. I never expected to stay. Just needed a place to hide from ghosts. And what about? Now? He looked at her. Now I'd fight hell itself to stay. Clara blinked back tears. You're not the man I married. No, he said. But maybe I'm the one you needed. Before she could answer, the sound of horses echoed. Outside, Jacob burst into the room. Mama, riders. 4 of them coming fast. Clara and Cole rushed out to the porch. Dust billowed across the ridge. 4 men on horses. Guns strapped low. Faces half covered. One shouted, We're here for Cole Maddox. Bring him out or we torch the place. Clara turned to him. More ghosts? He nodded. Silas boys. You? Going to run again? He shook his head. Not this time. He kissed her. It was sudden, fierce, filled with every word he hadn't dared say. Her breath caught. Her hands gripped his shirt before he pulled away. Keep the kids inside. Then he walked off the porch toward the barn where his rifle lay in the saddle holster. Clara's heart pounded. Jacob, she said, take Lily. To the root cellar. Don't come out until I say. Outside, Cole stood in the open. You don't want this, he shouted. Turn around. A gunshot rang out. He ducked, rolled, and returned fire. 1 rider fell. The others scattered. Clara grabbed her husband's old shotgun from over the hearth. She stepped out onto the porch and fired at a second rider, knocking him off his horse. She didn't even realize she was screaming. In minutes, it was over. 2 men fled. One lay bleeding by the corral. Another groaned in the grass. Cole was on. One knee, shoulder bleeding, but alive. Jacob rushed out. "Mama!" Clara grabbed her son. "Stay back." She ran to Cole. "Let me see." He winced as she tore open his shirt sleeve. "Just a graze," he muttered. "Ain't nothing." She pressed a cloth to the wound, eyes blazing. "You're not dying on me, not after all this." He looked up at her. "Then don't let me leave." She froze. "What?" "I'll turn myself in, Clara. Pay for what I did. But if there's any chance at all that you'll wait for me, then that's worth more than all the running I ever did." She stared at him, broken and bruised and raw. And then she smiled. It was small, trembling, but real. "I'll wait," she said. He leaned his forehead to hers. Then it was all worth it. Weeks passed. The law came and took the surviving outlaws. Cole rode to Abilene, turned himself in. But the testimony of the officer he once saved, along with Clara's own petition, led to his sentence being reduced. By fall, he returned, not as a ghost, but as a husband. This time for real. Jacob called him Pa without thinking. Lily braided his horse's mane every morning. And Clara? Clara no longer flinched when the wind howled. She simply pulled her shawl tight, set another place at the table, and waited for her cowboy to walk through the door, because sometimes the man you never imagined was the one fate always meant for you. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the wind had teeth. It bit at the skin, howled through the blackened remains of the barn, and clawed at the shutters of the Whitmore Ranch. But inside the house, something had changed, not in the way things looked, but in the way they felt. Cole had finally told Clara the truth. Not all of it. Not the deepest corners, but enough. And Clara had believed him. Not because she wanted to, but because the man she saw each day, the man her children trusted, the one who walked through smoke to save them, was not the kind of man who ran from the law without cause. And once you believe a man like that, there's no going back. So Clara stood beside him in front of Judge Harrow's threats, behind Sheriff Tate's watchful eye, and against every whispering mouth in town that muttered, "What's a woman like her doing with a man like that?" The next Sunday, Clara took Jacob and Lily into Jericho Ridge to church, Cole walking a few steps behind, not ashamed, just wary. Heads turned when they walked down the chapel aisle. Mothers clutched their children. Men nodded stiffly. Reverend Norris stopped mid-sermon when he saw the scarred cowboy take a seat beside the Whitmore children. But Clara kept her chin. Let them talk. Let them watch. She'd been quiet her whole life. No more. After the service, outside by the horse rail, she made her stand. "My husband's not perfect," she said, voice strong, "but I'd sooner put my faith in his hands than in any man who's tried to buy me or bury me." Harrow, standing on the steps like a vulture dressed in velvet, smiled coldly. "You think your words scare me, Mrs. Maddox?" "No," Clara replied, "but your time is running out." That afternoon, Sheriff Tate stopped by the ranch with an old tin box. Inside were documents, ledgers, receipts, and a single folded page torn from a railroad manifest, stolen from the judge's cousin by a guilt-stricken clerk before he vanished. "This bond proves he was carrying payroll money that went missing the same night of the robbery," Tate said. "And look here, signatures match the cousin's alias." Cole stared at the page. "It ain't enough for a trial." "No," Tate said. "But it's enough for a fight." And fight they did. They called a meeting Clara's idea. She rode house to house, ranch to ranch, gathering every small-time homesteader Harrow had tried to bleed dry. Men who'd lost cattle mysteriously. Women whose husbands were gone, whose land had been stolen under legal errors. By Friday, They gathered at the abandoned Grange Hall. 40 voices in a building meant for 15. Clara stood on a hay bale and spoke plainly. I don't care who's afraid of him. I don't care what he's promised. Harrow's taking more. Than land, he's taking dignity. He's banking on our silence. Well, I've been silent long enough. Who else? One by one, voices rose. An old rancher stood. He cut off my water rights. A widow nodded. Raised my taxes till I had to sell. A young couple whispered, he burned our cabin. Told us we'd never prove it. The tide turned that night. For the first time, people began to see what Clara had already known. They weren't alone. But Harrow didn't take rebellion lightly. 2 nights later, a bullet shattered the kitchen window just inches from Jacob's head. Cole tackled the boy to the floor, rolled him under the table, and grabbed the rifle from behind the stove. He fired once at nothing, but the silence that followed was answer enough. Are we safe? Clara asked breathlessly. No, Cole said, but we're ready. The next day, he and Jacob dug trenches near the barn ruins, reinforced the porch with iron nails. Hidden traps were set near the corral fence, and the doors were barred with extra beams. Lily sat beside Cole in the barn, carefully handing him nails as he mended her dollhouse. You? Gonna fight the bad man? She asked softly. Cole looked at her for a long moment. I'll stop him from hurting your mama. That's a promise. And she nodded just once and smiled. That night, under lantern light, Clara approached Cole as he sat oiling the rifle. Why are you still here? She asked. You've done enough. Cole didn't look up. A long time ago, I ran from a town that needed help. Told myself I was just one man. Couldn't make a difference. That guilt followed me farther than the law ever did. He paused. I won't run again. The next morning, a letter arrived by courier. A demand from Harrow, written in gold ink on expensive parchment. You have 48 hours to vacate. The land will be seized. Resistance will be met with force. Clara read the letter, then burned it over the stove. And on the 47th hour, the riders came, 6 men in dark coats, rifles across their saddles, with Harrow at the front, wearing a smug grin and a judge's badge pinned to his chest like a war medal. Stand down, Clara, he called from the fence line. This is the end of the trail. No, she replied, stepping forward, rifle at her side. It's just the start. The other ranchers began arriving on foot, on horseback, with tools and torches, old shotguns and shovels. They weren't soldiers. They were ranchers, mothers, widowers, fathers, teenagers with wild hearts and dust in their lungs. Harrow's men looked around, uneasy. We got more guns, Harrow barked. And we've got more reason, Clara snapped. Cole stepped up beside her. You want to try us? Go ahead, but I promise you whatever you take, we'll take back. Sheriff Tate rode up last. He held up the railroad document. This here's proof your cousin was the one with the stolen bond. And this town's no longer under your thumb. Harrow sneered. You got no cord? No, Tate said, but I got a jail. The men backed down. Harrow was arrested, seething, red with fury. His men scattered like leaves in the wind. Silence that followed was heavier than any shot fired. Clara turned to Cole, eyes wide, heart pounding. We stood our ground. He looked around the ranchers, the children, the sky finally clearing of storm clouds, and nodded once. You did, he said. And for the first time, Clara reached out and took his hand, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It began with a shadow, not the kind that comes at dusk, but the kind that follows a man across counties, across years, across his soul. The morning air was colder than usual when Clara stepped outside and found the barn door hanging open. Not broken, not forced, just ajar, swaying gently in the wind. Inside, the feed bins had been turned over, and Ghost, Cole's horse, was jittery eyes wild. hooves stomping. Cole was already awake. He didn't speak as he circled the perimeter, crouching low, inspecting the soil with practiced fingers. "Tracks?" Clara asked. He gave a tight nod. "One rider, light horse. Stayed off the main trail, watched us." Her stomach twisted. "Why?" "Could be Harrow, could be worse." "Worse?" She echoed. He stood slowly. "There's always worse." That night, Clara barred the doors and kept a shotgun by the kitchen stove. She didn't tell Jacob or Lily what had happened, only that the animals needed closer watch. The children didn't question her, but Lily clung to her skirts longer than usual, and Jacob started sleeping with his toy rifle across his knees. On the third night, the fire came. It started in the barn, the far end, where the hay was stacked, high and dry. Clara awoke to the smell of smoke and the pounding of hooves. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. "Fire!" Cole's voice boomed from outside. "Get the kids!" She rushed down the hall, snatching Lily from her bed and yelling for Jacob. They all tumbled onto the porch as flames licked the night sky. Cole was already inside the barn, cutting the horses loose, coughing through the smoke. Ghost burst out. First, then the others. Cole staggered out last, his shirt charred at the shoulder, eyes burning red. By dawn, the barn was a black skeleton. The tack room gone, the feed supply ruined. The land smelled of ash and loss. Clara held a blanket around Lily as they watched the last embers die. "Why would Harrow go this far?" she whispered. "He didn't," Cole said, staring at the horizon. "This wasn't his style." She turned. "Then who?" But before she could finish, a voice interrupted. "Well now, ain't this a shame?" A man in a long coat stood at the edge of the yard, a bounty badge clipped to his belt and a Winchester across his back. "Name's Cade Harlan," he drawled, "and you must be the infamous Cole Maddox." Cole's hands didn't twitch, but his body shifted slightly enough for Clara to notice. "I don't know you," Cole said flatly. "You don't have to," Harlan said. "The courts do. I got a poster says you escaped Leavenworth Prison 4 years ago, accused of armed robbery, attempted murder, and evading federal arrest." "Sound familiar?" Clara froze. The children huddled close. Cole said nothing. Harlan held up the paper. Cole's face was etched clearly on the worn parchment. Same jawline, same grim stare. "I've been tracking you from Missouri to New Mexico. Looks like I finally caught up." "You're too late," Cole said evenly. "That man's dead. That ain't for you to decide." Harlan stepped forward. Clara stepped in between them. "Wait," Harlan raised a brow. "You aiding a fugitive? Mrs. Maddox?" "He saved our lives," she said. "You show up in the middle of the night and accuse him of crimes without proof? I got all the proof I need right here." He tapped the wanted poster. "I don't care about your paper," Clara snapped. "You want to take a man who rebuilt this ranch, who risked his life for my children, over a charge you can't even explain?" Cole put a hand on her shoulder. "Clara, don't." "No," she said, eyes burning. "You owe me the truth." Cole turned to her slowly. "I didn't rob the train. I didn't shoot the marshal. But I was there." "Where?" she asked, barely breathing. 5 years ago, I rode with a crewman I trusted. One of them was Harrow's cousin. We were supposed to herd cattle across state lines. Instead, they stopped a military payroll train outside Junction Bluff. I didn't know till it was too late. When I tried to stop it, shots were fired. I was knocked out, left for dead. When I woke, they were gone, and I was the only one that marshals found. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wouldn't matter. The law doesn't listen to ghosts." Sheriff Tate arrived just after sunrise, summoned by Lily, who'd ridden into town on Ghost with a note tied to her wrist. He listened to both men, then stood silent for a long time. Finally, he turned to Harlan. You got proof that Harrow's cousin was part of this? No, Harlan muttered, but he's guilty. I've chased too many trails not to know a man's scent. Sheriff Tate looked at Clara. What do you believe? She looked at Cole, his worn face, his burned shirt, the honesty carved in every scar. I believe my husband is innocent, she said, and I believe he deserves a chance to prove it. Tate scratched his chin. Then let's make it legal. Within hours they rode to the county clerk and updated the marriage registration. It was no longer a name on paper. Clara signed with a full hand. So did Cole. Witnessed. Sealed dot on the ride home. Cole didn't speak for miles. Finally, he turned and said, You didn't have to do that. Clara met his gaze. I did. That night, as Cole sat alone at the charred barn frame, Clara brought him coffee. I don't care what's behind you, she said. I care about what you've done here, what you've done for us. Cole nodded. Slowly. Harrow won't stop. Then we don't either, she replied. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the day he arrived. You're not like other women, he said softly, and you're not like other men, she whispered. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch, but something passed between them that night stronger than words, a vow spoken in silence. A bond formed not by romance but by fire, ash, and the promise of protection. The past had finally ridden in, but it hadn't won, not yet. The weeks rolled by like tumbleweeds, quiet, dusty, and slow-moving, but not without their storms. Out at Whitmore Ranch, the days began early and ended with tired muscles and aching limbs. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the repaired fences or the steadily growing pile of firewood. It was the silence between Clara and Cole, the kind that wasn't awkward anymore. It was something understood, respected, familiar. Cole never asked for more than he was given. Never stepped beyond the boundaries Clara had drawn. He worked harder than any hired man she'd ever known, rising before the rooster crowed, going to sleep after the stars blinked into the sky. But Clara had begun to notice things, quiet things, like how Cole winced when he heard gunshots in the distance, even if they were just for sport. How he always sat with his back to the wall in the kitchen. How he rubbed a faded scar on his left wrist when he thought no one was watching. One evening, she found him sitting by the well, carving something into the edge of his saddle. She couldn't see what his knife moved slow, deliberate. Your horse's name? She asked, breaking the silence. Cole glanced up. Ghost. Fitting. She don't complain, he said. Stays quiet, moves fast. Knows how to disappear when the world gets too loud. Clara leaned against the post, arms folded. She sounded like her rider. He didn't smile. But there was a flicker of something, just for a second, Jacob had. Started following Cole like a shadow. He'd ask questions, trail behind him during chores, mimic his stride. And though Cole never claimed to like kids, he'd pause to teach Jacob how to hold a lasso properly or how to mend leather. Lily, shy as a rabbit, had begun bringing him little things, wildflowers, buttons, half-broken toys she wanted fixed. Cole never turned her away. Clara told herself not to notice how he softened with them. Told herself not to hope. But then came the night she discovered the locket. She had been in the barn, searching for an old oil lantern when she tripped over Cole's saddlebag. It spilled across the floor. She bent down to gather the contents, just tools, rope, a sharpened whetstone, until her fingers brushed something cold and metal. It was a small silver locket, worn and tarnished. She opened it. Inside were initials etched in elegant script. A .w. No photo. Just those letters, her heartbeat. Quickened? A woman? A child? A mother? A wife? She placed it back, careful to tuck it just as she found it. But her mind wouldn't stop turning. That night, after the children were asleep, She stepped out to the porch where Cole was whittling in the moonlight. She stood silently for a moment. Before saying, "You've been kind to us, more than I expected." He didn't look up, just doing the job. What's abuse stand for? The knife paused mid-carve, his body stilled. The silence stretched thin. "Where'd you see that?" "In your bag. I wasn't snooping. It fell open." He looked down at the blade in his hand, then slowly set it aside. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." Cole stood and stepped toward the railing. His eyes were distant, darker than usual. "She was someone I couldn't save," he said simply. "That's all." Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. He turned to her. "I didn't come here to bleed out old stories, Clara. You needed a name on a line. That's what I gave you. Nothing more. Is that all you think this is now?" He didn't answer. Later that night, she watched him from the upstairs window as he sat alone in the barn, staring at the same locket in his hands. But that wasn't the only strange thing that happened that week. A man came riding up the trail one afternoon, slick coat, gold ring glinting, and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He introduced himself as Judge Malcolm Harrow, a land investor from the neighboring county. "I heard the Whitmore Ranch might be changing hands," he said smoothly. Clara squared her shoulders. "It ain't for sale." The judge smiled wider. "Everything's for sale when the winter's hard and the debts are deep." Cole stepped onto the porch just then, arms folded. "I suggest you ride back the way you came," he said coldly. The judge's eyes flicked to him. "And who might you be? Husband, is that so?" Harrow chuckled. "Well then, Mr. Husband, I do hope you've got deeper pockets than your lady wife." Cole didn't move. "We're not interested." The judge tipped his hat, but his voice turned to ice. "Time has a way of squeezing people, Mr. Maddox, and when it does, folks usually come crawling back." When he rode off, Clara turned to Cole. "You know him?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Not well, but I've heard enough." She didn't ask more, but that night the chickens didn't come home to roost. In the morning, she found 3 of them, strangled, feathers scattered. A message carved into the post with a knife: "Sell." Sheriff Tate was sympathetic but offered little hope. Harrow's men don't leave evidence, and if they do, they pay to erase it. Clara stood on the porch, arms trembling but eyes hard. "I won't give in." Cole stood beside her. "Then neither will I." That evening, he pulled something out from beneath the barn floorboards, a pistol in a wrapped oilcloth, old but clean, loaded and ready. "You said you weren't staying long," Clara whispered, watching him. "I wasn't," he said. "But some ghosts don't leave until they're done." And as the wind kicked up again, swirling dust across the plains, Clara realized the man she'd married wasn't just a hired hand or a drifting soul. He was a man who had been hunted, a man with enemies, a man who had buried something deep and who might just be the only person strong enough to protect everything she had left. But if his secrets caught up to him, they might bury them all. The wind had just begun to carry the edge of winter as Cole Maddox stood at the base of Clara's porch, dust settling around his boots. He didn't blink, didn't smile. He looked like a man who'd ridden farther than most had walked in there. Lives and carried something inside that had never quite healed. Clara studied him with a rancher's eye. Not just the clothes or his broad frame, but the way he stood, the silence he wore like a second skin, the hollowness behind those steel-colored eyes. This man was running from something. She knew the type, but she also knew better than to ask. Questions she didn't want answered. "You any good with fence wire?" she asked, arms crossed. "I've strung more miles of it than I've seen towns," he said. "You ride?" "Better than I sleep." "You drink?" "When it rains, and not often." "You hit?" "Only when a man gives me reason." "Or to defend." "Something worth defending." They stared each other down. Clara's jaw was tight. Cole's eyes were unreadable. "Barn's out back," she finally said. "I got one guest room, but it stays locked. You'll sleep in the hay until we figure this out." "Hay don't bite," he replied simply. She gave him a sharp look. "This is a marriage of necessity. You don't touch me. You don't lecture. My kids, you do your work and sign the paper when it comes time. That's it." He nodded once. "I ain't a preacher, Clara Whitmore. Just a man with 2 working hands and no place to be." By dusk, Cole had moved his gear to the barn, though. It wasn't much. A worn saddle, a rolled-up bedroll, a flint knife, and a weather-stained satchel. No trunk, no picture. No past. Jacob watched him from the loft, curious and squinting. Lily peeked through the slats of the porch, half in wonder, half in worry. Clara had told him the truth mostly. "Mr. Maddox is going to be staying for a while. He's helping on the ranch. You be polite." "He don't smile much," Jacob said, scrunching his nose. "He don't have much reason to," Clara replied. That evening, she cooked beans and cornbread. Cole joined them at the table, hat removed, hands washed. He said little, ate slow. Lily slid her plate toward him when she couldn't finish. He took it without comment, scraping the crumbs clean. "Where you from, mister?" Jacob asked. Cole looked up from his fork. "Nowhere worth remembering." Jacob didn't ask again. After supper, Cole slipped outside and repaired a broken hinge. On the chicken coop, he didn't ask. Just noticed it was hanging loose and did the work. By the second morning, Clara found him already splitting firewood before dawn. Shirt sleeves rolled, sweat at his brow, muscles coiled like rope. He didn't speak when she passed. Just nodded once. It was like that for days. Quiet. Efficient. Distant. But effective. In a week. He'd reinforced the east fence, mended the broken pump, and removed a hornet nest from the rafters of the barn without a single sting. He barely came inside unless asked. Clara tried not to admit the difference his presence made, but it was there in the steadiness, the unspoken order. The way the ranch didn't seem to creak in protest anymore. One afternoon, as she brushed her mare, Clara asked, "Why do this? Why marry a stranger for a patch of land that ain't even yours?" Cole paused mid-hammer at the porch rail he was repairing. He didn't look up. "Because you asked?" he said flatly. "That's it." He set the hammer down gently. "You need this ranch. I need a quiet place with no questions. We both get what we want." She didn't press further. Later that week, they rode into Jericho Ridge together. Cole wore his best shirt, which still looked like it had seen better days, and Clara wore her faded Sunday dress. They stepped into the sheriff's office where Sheriff Amistad, a man with gray whiskers and a belly that spoke of too much pie, looked up and frowned. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Clara Whitmore and—" "Cole Maddox," Cole said with a nod. "We're getting married," Clara said, voice even. Tate looked from one to the other. "You sure? No love, no romance." "Just paperwork," she said, plainly. Tate rubbed the back of his neck, sighed, and fetched the forms. "Ain't my business what 2 grown folks decide to do. But if you're fixing to fool the land office, make sure you at least pretend well." "We're not fooling anyone," Clara said. "It's legal. It's all I need." Cole signed with steady hands. Clara did the same. They left town as Mr. and Mrs. Maddox, though neither of them used the name. That night, Lily left a flower on Cole's dinner plate. A wild daisy. He didn't say a word, just tucked it gently into the corner of the window behind his chair. The wind outside howled louder than usual. Maybe it sensed change was coming. But inside the house, for the first time in a long time, things were still, and maybe, just maybe, safe. The wind whipped through the Wyoming plains like it had a grudge against the earth. Dust swirled in ghostly columns over the dry land, and every step a horse took kicked up memories of storms past. It was late autumn. What little color had kissed the land was now fading to brown and gray. A bitter winter loomed on the horizon, and out there, about 8 miles from the nearest town, stood the Whitmore Ranch, weather-beaten, half-fenced and weary-looking, much like the woman who owned it. Clara Whitmore wiped sweat and grit from her brow as she hammered the final nail into the post she'd been mending since sunrise. Her hands were calloused, her back ached, and her dress was 2 seasons too old. But she was still upright, still fighting, and still alone. 2 years ago, her husband Thomas was trampled by a cattle stampede. It was supposed to be a simple roundup. Nothing in the world had prepared Clara for the way life could change in a single scream. Since that day, she'd buried him on the hill near the cottonwood tree and tried to keep the ranch running for the children's sake and for his memory. But the land was unforgiving. Jacob, her 9-year-old, was up in the hayloft when the rail gave way. He yelped but didn't cry, just dusted himself off and went back to stacking. His younger sister Lily was by the kitchen, tending to the hens like her mama taught her. Clara glanced at them from time to time, the pain in her chest swelling and retreating like a tide. That morning, she had opened a letter from the Territorial Land Office. Her hands trembled as she read the fine script. As per the amended homestead conditions of 1874, land title retention for widowed or single individuals now requires financial solvency or lawful marriage. Documentation to validate full ownership. Failure to comply will result in reclamation and public auction within 60 days. 60 days. Clara swallowed hard. The ink might as well have been fire. It burned just as bad. She didn't need a reminder. The loan payments had been delayed twice. The bank's patience was thin as old wire. If she didn't act fast, the land her children ran on, the land her husband bled for, would be gone. And her babies would have nowhere to grow up. At supper, Clara barely touched her stew. The children talked about wild horses and coyotes. Jacob wanted to learn how to shoot like his pay had promised. Lily hummed a tune about stars. After tucking them in, Clara stepped onto the porch and stared out at the moonlit pasture. She had 2 options. 1, lose everything. 2, marry someone. Not for love, not for dreams, just for legal ownership. Just to save the ranch. She whispered into the night, I won't let them take it. I can't. The next morning, she hitched her wagon and made the dusty ride into town. Jericho Ridge. Population just shy of 600. The church steeple greeted her first, then the sheriff's office, the grocer, the blacksmith. People tipped their hats. Some looked at her with pity, some with curiosity. She nodded back but didn't stop. She entered the general store. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, boots echoing on the wood floor. Old Miss Harper, the shopkeeper's widow sister, was behind the counter, polishing apples. Well now, Clara Whitmore, she said with a smile. You look like a woman with something heavy on her mind. Clara managed a tight smile. Just running low on flour and courage. Miss Harper chuckled, but Clara didn't. She waited until the store emptied out before she stepped closer. I need you to spread word quiet-like, Clara said, voice low and eyes steady. I'm looking for a husband. In name only. Miss Harper blinked. Beg your pardon? Not for real. Just on paper. Just long enough to keep the land from being taken. I'll feed him. Give him a bed barn, not house. He'll get a legal marriage and some hot coffee. I get to keep my home. That's all. The old woman stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You sure about this? Clara clenched her jaw. If I weren't, I wouldn't be a skin. I'll whisper it to a few who whisper loud, Miss Harper said gently. But menfolk ain't easy. Especially ones willing to tie themselves to land without a dowry. Dowry's the ranch, Clara said. And it's more than most men'll ever own. That night, Clara waited on her porch, watching the road that ran past the wheat fields. She didn't expect an answer quickly, but something in her gut told her the wind was shifting. She could feel it in her bones. And it came 5 days later when the sky turned copper before a storm. He rode in alone. No pack horse. No friends. No words. A tall man on a dappled gray stallion, dressed in worn buckskin, a faded hat pulled low over his eyes. He dismounted slowly, tied his reins to the hitch, and walked toward her porch like he already belonged there. "Name's Cole Maddox," he said, voice like gravel rubbed in whiskey. "Heard you're looking for a husband. I'm available. But I don't do love stories." Clara stepped down from the porch and faced him, hands at her hips. "I ain't looking for a hero. Just someone who can sign their name and keep their mouth shut." He nodded. "Good. I'm real good at both." And just like that, the wind shifted again, not just across the land, but through Clara Whitmore's heart.